Yeah. So, are you familiar with Daniel Kahneman?
Yes.
The behavioral economist. Yeah. And there's a fascinating book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And it's a really interesting book. One thing in particular that came to my mind recently was the fact that they've found over and over again that people weight losses more heavily than gains. So for example, they do an experiment where like they ask people, would you be willing to enter a wager where you could gain or lose $100? And nobody says yes to that. And they have to be like, the upside has to be about twice as much as the downside in order for people on average to be willing to engage in that gamble. And so I thought, is this an instance of a malevolent universe kind of thinking, that we think of losses as being more important than gains? Or is it something else? I mean, because I do, like, if I just pay attention to how I feel, I also feel kind of an initial reluctance I do feel a loss maybe more strongly than a gain. But then if you think about it in a more long-term perspective, if you had a policy of consistently saying, okay, well, if I can lose as much as I gain, then yeah, I'll do it. Then on a net basis, you haven't really lost anything. And so maybe it's a failure of longer-term thinking, or maybe there's something to it. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's a consequence of the fact that we're not trained to think properly. So, Kahneman and a lot of others attribute this to somehow genetics. We're programmed in this way because it's such a common phenomenon. First of all, it's not everybody. Not everybody's like that. It's the majority, but it's not everybody. And we're not trained to think long-term, and we're not trained to think probabilistically. And we do most people, because they're not trained to think, rely too much on emotions. Now, why is the fear? Why do we worry so much about the downside? Maybe that has to do with genetics in a sense that we're wired, because when you're an animal, right? When you're not a cognitive being, bad stuff can end your existence very quickly. So it could be that something in our wiring, and I wouldn't know how this works, but something in our wiring overweighs overweights signs of risk, fear, right? Mm-hmm. But then why are we afraid, right? If it's just a probabilistic, well, what am I, so I still think at the end of the day, it's a failure of proper thinking and a failure of teaching people how to think properly. Mm-hmm. I think the more you train yourself to think properly, the more you train yourself in probabilities and what they mean, the fear will go away. Mm-hmm. Because you'll understand what it actually means. You won't be relying on some instinct. I don't even know if it's instinctual, some immediate response. Your emotions will catch up in a sense.
Yeah.
And this is the thing about.
Yeah, it's true. I mean,
it would be interesting if you could take the people who overweight the downside and train them, spend like a year giving them classes and having them do stuff, and then test them again. It would be interesting if it goes away. My guess is,
yeah,
it would. I
think so too. And it's you can override it with your thinking and condition yourself not to be afraid of it anymore. But the thing that I hung up on is that it's there in the first place as a default state, and that's the part that I don't quite understand.
I think what might be there as a default state is that we're more sensitive to things that we perceive as threats. Now, so we consciously have to perceive it as a threat, but that our emotional system, our nervous system is wired so that it has greater sensitivity. Right? That could be wired. That is, there could be an asymmetry between risk, between positives and negative potential outcomes, that we just have a strong response to negatives because we're wired that way because of the risk of complete demise, right? But then but once you understand that the loss here is not a loss like that, it's a different type of loss, then that wiring, I think, becomes irrelevant. Maybe, right? There's still a lot that we don't know. And part of the problem is that, the evolutionary psychologists are, if they weren't determinists, then I think they could discover really interesting things. The problem is anything they come up with today is suspect because they start from the premise of determinism. And then you just don't know how much and what to believe, to trust in what they say and how much not.
And to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize. I know this is difficult. Can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith.
On faith?
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right, all right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
May I?
All right, before we go on, reminder, please like the show. We've got 163 live listeners right now, 30 likes. That should be at least 100. I figure at least 100 of you actually like the show. Maybe there are like 60 of the Matthews out there who hate it. But at least the people who are liking it, I want to see a thumbs up. There you go. Start liking it. I want to see that go to 100. All it takes is a click of a thing, whether you're looking at this. And the likes matter. It's not an issue of my ego. It's an issue of the algorithm. The more you like something, the more the algorithm likes it. So, and if you don't like the show, give it a thumbs down. Let's see your actual views being reflected in the likes. But if you like it, don't just sit there. Help get the show promoted. Of course, you should also share. And you can support the show at JeronBrookShow.com/support, or on Patreon or Subscribestar or Locals, and show your support for the work, for the value hopefully you're receiving from this. And of course, don't forget, if you're not a subscriber, even if you just come here to troll, or even if you're here like Matthew to defend Marx, then you should subscribe, because that way you'll know when to show up. You'll know what shows are on, when they're on. You'll get notified, right? So, yes, like, share, subscribe, support. Like, share, subscribe, support. There you go. Easy. Do one or all of those, please.